So my silly little hot take today is that I don't think plagiarism in the fashion industry is always bad. And that's because I also think we shouldn't think about fashion, the cultural and social artifact, as any one thing that can be owned by any one person. In 2018, Spanish fast fashion giant Zara came under flack for releasing these socks, which a lot of people were very quick to realize were incredibly similar to designs sold by South African brand MaXhosa by Laduma. Now, I've never ever been one to defend a fast fashion company, and there was a lot of credit and merit to the arguments made of how exploitative, unjust, and just wrongfully appropriative this move was. Large corporations should 100% all the time be taken to task for being able to bankrupt and deprive smaller businesses and individuals with their massive resources and global supply chains while they're busy forcing sleep-deprived design teams to mine the Instagram algorithm for the next Hailey Bieber fashion moment, like a bunch of Victorian chimney sweeps. And that's not even to get into their atrocities happening in their outsourced production lines, which doesn't matter what they tell you, they're very well aware of what's going on there. But a lot of the rhetoric around this move concerned things like artistic integrity, the designer as artist, and most troubling of all to me, ownership. At the time, MaXhosa designer Laduma said this to Business Insider: "I do feel that in this regard, because of the disrespect they have shown and the lack of respect for artistic integrity, I will be returning their products. They did not respect me as an artist who creates the designs." Now, for the uninitiated, MaXhosa is a South African luxury brand founded in 2010, which produces knitwear in the style of traditional Xhosa beadwork. According to the brand itself, MaXhosa designs showcase the beauty, culture, language, and aspiration of the Xhosa people. With that in mind and with that understanding, Laduma, the designer himself, doesn't necessarily own these designs or this aesthetic any more than Zara does, in a sense. When I say that, I mean that none of these designs, none of his inspirations, none of his aesthetic or his products would be possible without years-long contributions by several people. And I feel that in our quest to legitimize fashion as an art form, we've become hyper-focused on the idea of designers and creative directors as these singular mavericks and pioneers, that we're forgetting that fashion has always been a group project. And the further we remove ourselves from the community aspect of fashion, the closer we're just getting to dressing for the end of the world. Part 1. Why do we want fashion to be art? Now, as something of a fashion person myself, it might seem really strange, but I've also come to see that desire to assert fashion as art is mostly the result of an industry that's long been considered frivolous, narcissistic, and superficial, essentially just trying to justify its existence continually. Though I don't know if we should ever let people who work in the stock market tell anyone that their job in fashion isn't real, like the stock market. And today, it's incredibly common to see fashion occupy the same space as painting and sculpture in galleries and museums, even for fine artists to work together with fashion designers, case in point, see Elsa Schiaparelli and the Surrealists, or even for people to create clothing with really profound symbolic meaning and intent with a function beyond your physiological needs, such as comfort and protection, like the very basic function of clothing. But that doesn't mean we need to call it art. However, to quote myself, the fashion industry is made up of more than just designers, creative directors, curators, photographers, and magazine editors. Whenever we speak of the artistic nature of fashion, we're often omitting how much of the fashion industry is the product and the result and the work of the laborers. And by the laborers, I'm talking about the sewists and the garment factory workers, the salespeople, the textile farmers. These people are the core of this industry, yet I very rarely ever see anyone calling them artists or creatives or creators. Adding on to that, the majority of these laborers are underpaid and overworked women, primarily in the global south. And I feel like that this distinction of fashion as art seems to serve to further the misogynistic and racist exclusivity of the fashion industry. That was a bit of a bar, yeah. But this all starts with how Queen Victoria's favorite couturier, Charles Frederick Worth of the House of Worth, is often seen as responsible for pioneering the concept of the fashion designer. Before Worth, much of Western dressmaking was the purview of lower to middle class women. They were unnamed, unknown, and uncredited. Worth was the first to sort of introduce the clothing label in the same vein that artists would add their signatures to paintings. He would go and get inspiration from artworks in the National Gallery, and instead of toiling behind a sewing machine or working in a millinery or something, he dictated his vision to seamstresses. Following Worth's lead, the fashion designer was no longer a laborer, but a conceptualist, a thinker, a philosopher, if you will, all while gaining this greater success off of the contributions of women and people of color and the working class. Part 2. Art is bad. Since the 20th century, fine artists have worked to remove the barriers between high art and low art, constantly blurring the line between the commercial or the mainstream and the elite and the exclusive. And in a world where a painting of a soup can or a banana duct taped to a gallery wall or a Bored Ape are considered fine art, then it does only make sense that in this definition that clothing can also be considered fine art as well. Especially when you've had designers like Alexander McQueen bringing elements of performance and these thematic narratives to something as commercial as the fashion show. Which is kind of funny because we're very quick to recognize fashion as an art because it's a creative industry, while I feel like we rarely acknowledge the creativity involved in like science and technology. I mean, we might acknowledge that chemical engineering is an art form, that plumbing is an art form, but we're never really rushing to call any of those people artists or what they do art either, right? And my point is just that we can celebrate ingenuity and innovation without vying for this glorified label, this category, this sense of worth and higher esteem and value. At that, I don't think the way the art industry operates is something we should seek to replicate in the fashion industry. Speaking very broadly, the art industry at large operates in an incredibly heinous way. It's become a tax haven for the rich, where these so-called contributions to society, culture, and thought are kept in inaccessible, white-walled spaces, alienating many of the very people it's supposed to be speaking to or speaking to for or supposed to provide value for. And I always get this like really itchy feeling when I visit the galleries in Rosebank and see this socio-political conversation about the state of blackness or femininity or queerness or whatever that's being put in a context that makes the ordinary person feel like that this isn't for them to understand, enjoy, critique, or even own or have or take part in. Clothing, on the other hand, does or at least should operate in the opposite way. Every single person wears clothing and we're all active participants in the system, even if we don't have special art history degrees or offshore bank accounts or whatever the hell you need to enjoy art. And I must emphasize that we are all active parts of the fashion industry. Even if you're not a designer or a retail salesperson or a photographer, and not even just as a consumer buying these garments, fashion is something we all collectively create and negotiate and decide on. People who are even anti-fashion have a role in saying what is and isn't fashion. Scrolling through Instagram and deciding you hate the clean girl aesthetic, that's active participation. Agreeing with the consensus that red berets mean this particular thing, or that a purple ribbon on your collar means that particular thing, is an active contribution. Fashion only has meaning for as much as all of us decide that it has meaning. And you don't get anything like that on that kind of scale in what we traditionally recognize as the art world. And I don't know where this fits in, but I feel like you can see that happening a lot in the luxury sector. Like, they're very particularly guilty of playing into the tropes of the art industry. Like, there's this immense emphasis placed on the monetary value of an item. Even if it is under the guise of skill and craftsmanship and heritage, it still tends to ignore the many, many hands and ideas that form the basis of any garment that come to like make its existence come to fruition. So much of luxury now has been boiled down to being a shrine to wealth, the ability to have while others don't. And it's notable that just like with fine art, corrupt politicians and business people will often use luxury fashion products to launder money. That's what they love, going to the Gucci store to pay bribes. And I just don't feel like that should ever be what fashion is and becomes and ends up being. Part 3, we should all hold hands. So I'm becoming a little aware right now that this might seem like an argument about semantics, and there is nothing more tired than a debate about that. But I am just a girl sitting in front of a camera, hoping that in our efforts to legitimize fashion and justify not only its existence, but its importance and value to the greater good, we're doing that with the collective in mind, with a community-centered approach. If designers are artists, then so should be weavers and farmers and packers. And that instead of driving ourselves mad over who originated a thought first, or who owns this aesthetic and who's allowed to produce elements of this culture or that culture, that we think about how everything is always the result of a we, of an us. That there is no me against you, it is always just us doing stuff for us. That the most valuable aspect of this art is how it was made by and made for the group. That everything we produce and consume is in service of the collective. And that, I feel like, is going to be so key for us to ever get a really good grip on building and making sure we have a sustainable and ethical system. You know, one thing I think about a lot was how when I was in fashion school, and here you're going to hear the sad tale of a fashion school dropout. But there was a lot of emphasis on each of us as individual, like, fashion design students to be the next Alexander McQueen, be the next Tebe Magugu, and be the next Karl Lagerfeld, to be this pioneer, the singular individual who comes up with the greatest ideas, who single-handedly solves a problem, who is just this one person doing it all. And I've realized recently we never really ever discussed or unpacked in the structured, institutionalized way, the way we engage community in the things we make. You know what I mean? Like, there was never like a discussion about like, why are we going to a CMT factory where we never interact with the actual people making our garments? We speak to like the manager, the owner, or someone over email, or we're gonna go do drop shipping or do all our production in China where we never interact with those people. We know nothing about them. And instead we're so focused on making sure that our singular vision gets put into production and gets sold and commodified, where fashion should be this collaborative thing. Like, why is it never encouraged, or why was it never encouraged, for me at least, that we should go look out into our communities? Like, I tell people all the time, there is this excess of skill and talent in the garment and textile industry in South Africa, and there are so many, especially women, who have been left jobless by the failure and the fall of our textile industry, who have so much skill, who have so much knowledge, that's not only things that they've acquired throughout their time working as like textile workers, but that they've had passed down to them and passed down to their grandmothers and their family members before that. And that when we're going to want to make clothing to solve problems, we should start with the people we're solving those problems for. Every fashion line, I think, should always start with like a huge community meeting, like finding out who knows what skills, who has alternative approaches to the things you want to do and solve. Where are the places you could find ways to ethically produce something that might have these deep ties to cultural practices, to long-held beliefs, to long-held customs. I speak a lot about how, like, in order to make fashion really sustainable in the future, we're really going to have to decolonize our approach. And I think that in our own communities, particularly in the global south and in Africa, there is so much knowledge left out of history books, left out of textbooks, left out of our commercial understandings of fashion and culture, that really have a lot of the solutions we need right now. And I think that moving forward, we should always understand that we cannot keep coming up with capitalist solutions to what is a capitalist problem. Our answers should never ever be identical to the problem itself. And thank you so much for coming to my TED Talk. Oh, well, yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think, and also, like, let me know any cool people you guys are aware of who are like thinking about fashion in this broader aspect. And maybe if you think I'm wrong, actually I love when people think I'm wrong. I love being yelled at. Talk to me about why you think we should consider fashion as an art, or is there ways the art industry is currently operating that would be good for the fashion model or something? I don't know. Yeah, I said all of that in one breath. I gotta go.
Look around you. Look at this. We created this. This didn't exist before we were here. Look around at the square. I promise you right now, we did it.